the heiress walked into the lighthouse keeper's cottage to deliver an eviction notice. She didn't know the man inside had spent 11 years protecting her mother's last confession. It was a Tuesday in late October when Adeline Forsyth drove the coast road north out of Halifax. The sky was the color of old pewter, and the sea beneath it moved without urgency, slow gray swells rolling in from the open Atlantic. She had the heater on and the radio off. The folder on the passenger seat held a single document, a formal notice of property transfer, signed and witnessed, prepared by the firm her grandfather had used for 40 years. The lighthouse at Dunmore Point had belonged to Forsyth Marine Holdings since 1987. It had sat unoccupied for the better part of a decade until 3 years ago, when someone named Kieran Voss had applied for a caretaker's lease at a rate so low it had been approved without her knowledge by an administrator who no longer worked for the company. Adeline had found the lease during a routine audit in September. She had sent 2 letters. Neither had received a reply. She was not accustomed to being ignored. The road narrowed past Prospect and the spruce trees closed in on both sides. The GPS lost confidence around the last bend and suggested a gravel track that ran along the headland. The cottage sat back from the lighthouse itself, a low white building with a green metal roof and a woodpile stacked under an overhang that reached nearly to the eaves. Someone had stacked it with care. The rounds were split even, the faces turned outward, the whole structure covered with a tarpaul. Pollen waited at the corners with round stones from the beach. She parked beside a salt-bleached Dodge pickup and got out into the wind. The door opened before she reached it. The man who stood in the frame was not what she had assembled from the lease paperwork. She had expected someone older, someone with a particular kind of stillness that came from long isolation. Kieran Voss was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, with the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outside. He wore a canvas work shirt, rolled to the elbows despite the cold. He was holding a small metal plane in one hand, a woodworking tool, and a curl of pale shaving hung from his wrist like a ribbon. He did not say hello. He looked at the folder in her hand and then at her face. "You're the Forsyth daughter," he said. "Granddaughter," she said. "Adeline, I know who you are." He did not move from the doorway. "I've been expecting someone. I didn't think they'd send you." "No one sent me." She held the folder out. "This is a notice of—" "I know what it is." He looked at it without taking it. "Come in if you want. There's coffee." She did not want to come in. She wanted him to take the document, acknowledge receipt, and give her a date by which the property would be vacated. That was the entirety of what she had driven 90 minutes for. She came in. The inside of the cottage was not what she expected either. The front room smelled of wood smoke and linseed oil. A half-finished cabinet stood against one wall, its doors leaning separately against the baseboard. On the workbench along the window, tools were laid out in order by size. On the kitchen table, a mug, a notebook open to a page dense with handwriting, and beside it a paperback with a spine cracked wide. The floor had been recently swept. A pair of small rubber boots sat by the back door. She registered the boots and then looked away. "Sit down," Kieran said. He poured coffee into a second mug without asking how she took it and set it in front of her with a small jar of cream. He sat across from her and picked up his own mug and did not speak. The silence was not uncomfortable in the way silences usually were when she was in them. That was the first strange thing. "The lease was approved in error," she said. "The caretaker position was not an authorized term. The rate is below market by a significant margin, and the company has no record of a formal application process. I applied through your grandfather's office," Kieran said. "He approved it himself." She looked up. "Gerald Forsyth is 81 years old," she said. "He retired from active management in 2019. "He approved it in 2021, Kieran said. "In person, at this table." She set the folder down. "Why would my grandfather come here?" Kieran looked at her for a moment. Then he stood and went to the back of the cottage. She heard a drawer open and close. He came back with a white envelope and set it on the table between them. Her name was on the front. Not her business name, not Forsyth Holdings, just Adeline. Written in a hand she had not seen in 4 years, angular and precise, the capital A looping upward. Her mother's hand. The cold moved through her from the chest outward. "What is that?" she said. It was not a question. "Your mother gave it to me 3 weeks before she died," Kieran said. "She asked me to keep it until you were ready." Adeline looked at the envelope. She did not pick it up. I'm going to need you to explain who you are, she said, and how you knew my mother. Kieran sat back down. He took his time. Outside, the wind came off the water and moved through the spruce trees with a sound like long exhaling. He had been a structural engineer, he said. Not the kind who sat in offices reviewing drawings, the kind who went to sites, who read foundations and load-bearing walls and stress tolerances with his hands as much as his instruments. For 6 years he had worked as an independent consultant for marine infrastructure projects across Atlantic Canada. He had been contracted by Forsyth Marine Holdings in 2013 for a refurbishment assessment on the Dunmore Point Lighthouse, which had fallen into disrepair after the automated system replaced the last full-time keeper. Her mother, Renata Forsyth, had been the company's director of operations at the time. She had managed the project herself. I worked with her for 4 months, Kieran said. She was thorough. She didn't sign off on anything she hadn't understood herself. Adeline knew this. Her mother had been like that about everything. And the envelope, Adeline said, has to wait, he said, not because I'm making it difficult. Because she was specific. She said when you come to this door to take the property back, don't give it to her until she's sat down long enough to have finished a cup of coffee. Adeline looked at her mug. She had not touched it. She picked it up and drank. The coffee was better than it had any right to be. From somewhere in the back of the cottage, a sound. A small thud, then footsteps, and then a girl appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and the back hall. She was 7 or 8, wearing a wool sweater with a reindeer on it, and one sock pulled higher than the other. She stopped when she saw Adeline. She did not hide. She assessed. That's my daughter, Kieran said. Blythe. The child looked at her father, then back at Adeline, with the particular precision of children who are accustomed to reading rooms. You're the lady from the company, Blythe said. Yes, Adeline said. Dad said you'd come eventually. She crossed the kitchen to the counter, pulled a stool over with the efficiency of long practice, and climbed up to reach a box of crackers. She brought them back to the table and sat down beside her father. She offered the box to Adeline without ceremony. Adeline took one. She did not know why. She was not hungry. She did not eat crackers. She took it because the gesture was so uncalculated that refusing felt like refusing something rare. She drove back to Halifax that afternoon without the property vacated and without the envelope opened. She had asked to take it with her. Kieran had said no. She told me to give it to you here, he said. When you were ready. How will you know when that is? He had looked at her with a steadiness she didn't have a category for. Come back, he said. She did not intend to. She came back on Thursday. The official reason was a site inspection she had scheduled with the coastal properties manager. The real reason was that she had not slept 2 nights running, and in the darkness she kept returning to the envelope on the table and the 4 letters of her name in her mother's handwriting. The coastal properties manager did not exist. She had invented him on the drive down. Kieran was working outside when she arrived, replacing weathered boards along the base of the lighthouse. He nodded when she pulled in, the same way someone nods at a neighbor, without surprise, without performance. She walked over and stood watching him work. You said you were an engineer, she said. Was. He pried a warped board free with a flat bar. I do this now. There's a difference between maintaining a building and building furniture. Less than you'd think. He set the old board aside and lifted a new one into place. Both come down to what holds. Blythe came out later with sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and ate hers on the top of the woodpile, watching a container ship move along the horizon. She told Adeline the names she had given to the 3 ravens that appeared on the headland every morning. She asked Adeline if she had ever seen a basking shark. She asked what kind of car that was in the driveway and whether Adeline had chosen it herself or if someone had chosen it for her. Adeline said she had chosen it herself. Blythe considered this. My dad let me choose the color of my room, she said. I chose the same green as the roof. She looked at the cottage. He said that was good judgment. Adeline looked at Kieran. He was fitting a board, face turned away, but she saw the corner of his mouth. She stayed for 3 hours. She left without opening the envelope and without asking to. On the drive back, she called her company counsel in Toronto and asked them to run a full ground search on Kieran Voss. Structural engineer, Atlantic region, contracts with marine infrastructure projects from 2010 to 2017. She asked them to be thorough. The file came back the next morning. Kieran Voss, licensed professional engineer, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI. Independent contractor from 2009 to 2017. The contracts included Forsyth Marine Holdings, 3 federal harbor authorities, 2 provincial bridge commissions, and a private shipbuilding concern out of Lunenburg. He had left the practice in 2017 following the death of his wife. The death was listed as a workplace accident. She read that line twice. She called her assistant and asked for the Forsyth Marine internal incident files from 2016 and 2017. Her assistant called back 40 minutes later. The files had been flagged restricted. She would need director-level authorization. Adeline was the director. The files took 4 hours to unlock. She read them at her desk with the door closed and her phone on silent. Kieran's wife had been a marine surveyor named Thea Voss. In March of 2017, she had been retained by Forsyth Holdings to assess the seawall infrastructure at the Dunmore Point Coastal Development Project, a commercial expansion the company had been driving for 2 years. During a site inspection on March 14th, a section of temporary scaffolding erected by the project's primary contractor had failed. Thea Voss had been standing on it. She had died at the scene. A dock laborer working below had broken both arms. An internal safety review had been filed 6 weeks before the accident, identifying the scaffolding as non-compliant with provincial standards. The report had been suppressed by the project director, a man named Stuart Angel, on the grounds that halting work would delay completion by 3 months and trigger a penalty clause in the development contract worth $4 million. Stuart Angel had retired from Forsyth Holdings in 2019 with a full pension and a letter of commendation signed by the company's then-acting CEO, Adeline's grandfather. She sat for a long time without moving. She called her grandfather's house in Armdale. His housekeeper answered and said he was resting and not to be disturbed. Adeline said she would be there in 20 minutes. Gerald Forsyth was 81 and small in his chair by the window, but his eyes were the same eyes they had always been. He knew why she was there before she sat down. "Your mother found out in 2020, he said. 3 years after it happened, she came to me directly. And I told her it had been handled. The families had been compensated. The project director had been managed out. Compensated quietly, Adeline said. Managed out with a commendation. He did not flinch. I was protecting the company. You were protecting Stuart Angel." A silence that had age in it. "Stuart was not the only one who signed off on the acceleration," Gerald said. She understood then. Not all of it yet, but enough. "My mother went to Voss," she said. "Your mother had been corresponding with him for months before she died. She felt responsible. She had approved the development budget. She had not known about the safety report. She didn't know until after he looked out the window. She was going to come forward. She told me in February of 2021. She had given Voss a letter, she said. For you, for when you were old enough to do what she couldn't bring herself to finish." Renata Forsyth had died in April of 2021. A cardiac event, sudden, at 54. The drive back to Dunmore Point was 90 minutes. She did not remember most of it. Kieran was at the workbench when she let herself in through the unlocked door. He looked up. He read her face the way he read wood grain, without drama, with complete attention. "Thea was your wife," she said. "She died on our project." He set down the tool in his hand. "Yes. You knew who I was when I walked in with that eviction notice." "Yes. And you didn't say anything. You needed to find it yourself," he said. "That's what your mother believed. She said if I told you before you were ready, you'd close around it. You'd protect the company before you understood what the company had done." Adeline sat down on the stool by the workbench. The cottage was very quiet. Outside, the sea moved against the headland the way it always had. "You waited 4 years, she said. After my mother died, your mother asked me to wait. She said when her daughter comes to take this place back, it'll mean she's running the company herself. It'll mean she's ready. I've been running it for 2 years. I know." He sat down across from her. "And you drove here yourself, which means you hadn't sent a lawyer, which means part of you already knew something was wrong." She looked at him. There was no triumph in his face, no leverage being calculated. He had been sitting in this cottage with a dead woman's letter for 4 years, keeping a promise, raising a child, building furniture with his hands because the work his wife had died on had made him unable to look at engineering drawings without the taste of something he couldn't name. She understood him, suddenly and completely, in the way you sometimes understand people who have been carrying the same kind of weight you have been pretending you weren't carrying. "How much of it is in the letter?" she said. "Everything your mother knew. The safety report. Who suppressed it. The settlement amounts. The names." He paused. "And the rest? What's the rest?" Kieran was quiet for a moment. Thea had backed up the original safety report before it was deleted. "Your mother found out. She includes instructions in the letter for where to find it." Adeline closed her eyes for just a second. When she opened them, she said, "Give me the letter." "Not yet." She looked at him. "Blythe is at Heiress's," he said, referring to the retired teacher down the road who minded the child when Kieran needed the house quiet. "She'll be back in 2 hours. I'd like you to still be here when she gets back, because I think when you read that letter, you're going to need to sit with it for more than a few minutes, and I don't want you driving the coast road alone in whatever state that puts you in." It was the most words he had said at once. She did not argue. He made more coffee. She sat with it. She looked at the half-finished cabinet against the wall. She asked him what it was for. "A client in Mahone Bay," he said. "Cherry wood." She wanted something that looked like it had always been there. "That's a particular kind of skill," Adeline said. "It's the only kind worth having," he said. When Blythe came back at 4 o'clock, she came in with a drawing she had done at Heiress's, a lighthouse in pencil, with the light colored in orange crayon, even though the actual light at Dunmore had been decommissioned since the 1990s. She looked at Adeline sitting at the kitchen table and made no comment on her continued presence, simply climbed into the chair beside her and spread the drawing out. "I made it with the light on," Blythe said, "because that's more interesting." "It's better," Adeline said. Blythe looked at her with the directness children reserve for moments they are taking seriously. "Are you sad?" "A little," Adeline said. Blythe nodded. "My dad gets sad sometimes and he just sands things for a while. It helps." Adeline looked across the table at Kieran, who was looking at his daughter with an expression she had not seen on him yet. Something that had nothing to do with her, or with the past, or with the weight of any of it. Something that was only his daughter. She took the envelope when Blythe fell asleep on the sofa after dinner. The letter was 4 pages in her mother's hand. It covered what Adeline had already read in the files, and went further. Renata named the 3 internal managers who had known about the safety report before the accident and had chosen to say nothing. She named the external legal firm that had drafted the silence agreements with the affected families, a firm Forsyth Holdings still retained. She described in her own words what she had felt when she found out, the specific shame of having signed the budget that accelerated the schedule that pressured the contractor that cut the corners. She wrote, near the end of the 3rd page, "I am not asking you to forgive the company. I am asking you to make it worth something that Thea Voss was the kind of person who made a copy." The final paragraph. "Kieran kept this for me because I knew he wouldn't use it as a weapon. He had every reason to. That tells you more about him than anything I could write. Trust that. Trust him." Adeline set the letter down. Her hands were steady. The shock had already moved through her on the drive from her grandfather's house. What was left was something she recognized from other moments of clarity, the sensation of understanding what needed to be done before knowing exactly how to do it. The backup file was on a small drive taped to the underside of a drawer in the cottage's back workroom. Renata's letter had given precise directions. Adeline found it in 4 minutes. She opened it on her laptop at the kitchen table. The original safety report, filed March 1, 2017. Thea Voss's name was on the front page as the reviewing surveyor. Her signature was in the approval section, along with her notes. Non-compliant with NS Occupational Health and Safety Act Section 17.4. See work stoppage, recommended pending contractor remediation. Below it, a chain of internal emails ending in a reply from Stuart Angel to the project coordinator. Disregard. Document not to be distributed. We proceed on schedule. Beneath that, a second email, sent from Angel to a personal address Adeline didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Keep this between us. GA has been informed and is supportive." GA, Gerald Forsyth's initials. She sat with that for a long time. Kieran came to the kitchen for a glass of water. He saw her face. He sat down without being asked. "Your grandfather knew about the suppression before the accident," she said. He said nothing. He had known. He had known for 4 years. "You never used it," she said. "Your mother asked me not to," he said. She said she wanted her daughter to be the one. She said if she were the one who came forward, the company would survive it as a story about a grieving mother. But if you did it, if the person running the company did it, it would mean something different. Adlin looked at him. She trusted you with a very large thing. She trusted that Blythe needed her father to stay here and do something simple and clean, he said. That was the larger part of it. Outside, the light had gone from the water. The cottage was warm, and the lamp over the table made everything inside it look like it had been there a long time. 3 weeks later, she called an emergency meeting of the Forsyth Holdings Board of Directors in Halifax. 7 members in a room with a harbor view, 4 days' notice, the minimum under the company's articles. She had retained independent counsel from a Vancouver firm and given them the complete file 5 days in advance. She opened with the quarterly infrastructure report. 2 of the board members visibly relaxed. Stuart Angel, reinstated to an advisory capacity 2 years prior at her grandfather's request, sat at the far end of the table and checked his phone. Then she turned the screen. Her mother's letter projected page by page, the original safety report, the email chain, the initials. The room went the kind of quiet that has weight. She made 4 motions. The immediate removal of Stuart Angel from all advisory roles, the voluntary disclosure of the 2017 incident to Nova Scotia Labour and Advanced Education, the Occupational Health and Safety Division, and the RCMP Commercial Crime Unit, the dissolution of the silence agreements with the affected families, with full and public acknowledgement of liability, and the establishment of an independent safety review of every active Forsyth Holdings project, results to be published and made public. She advanced 1 more slide, the safety report with Thea Voss's name on it, her signature, her notes in the margin, her recommendation that the work stop. She was right, Adeline said. The company chose not to listen. I am informing this board that the company will now answer for that, with or without your support. Angel stood. He said she was destroying everything her grandfather had built. She said, my grandfather knew about this report before Thea Voss died on that scaffolding. He may have other things to answer for. She did not look away from him. The RCMP will determine that. He sat back down. The vote was 5 in favor, 2 opposed. The 2 who opposed were named in the email chain. RCMP commercial crime investigators were waiting in the lobby when the meeting ended. She called Kieran from the car park afterward. He answered on the second ring. She told him what had happened. She told him about the vote, about Angel, about the investigators in the lobby. She told him the RCMP would likely want to speak with him about Thea's copy of the report and the chain of communication he'd had with Renata. He was quiet for a moment. How are you? He asked. No one had asked her that all day. I don't know yet, she said. I'll know in a few days. Blythe wants to know if you're coming back, he said. There was a pause that was not uncomfortable. Tell her I'll come on the weekend. The story moved through the CBC and the Halifax Chronicle Herald first, then the Globe and Mail, then the national wires. Stuart Angel was charged with 9 counts under the NS Occupational Health and Safety Act and 2 counts of criminal negligence. Her grandfather was interviewed by investigators twice. He was 81 and not in good health, and in the end the prosecutors determined, the evidence placed the decision, with Angel, with Gerald Forsyth's knowledge, but without his direction. Whether that was accurate or generous was something Adeline spent a long time deciding how she felt about. She met personally with Thea Voss's family, her parents, who still lived in Dartmouth, and a younger sister who had moved to British Columbia. She met with the laborer who had broken both arms, a man named Barry Ossie, who, Meacher, had partial use of his dominant hand and had not been able to return to his trade. She sat with each of them for as long as they needed. She did not interrupt. She signed nothing at those meetings and brought no lawyers. Barry Ossie told her that the hardest part had not been the injury. The hardest part had been signing the agreement that meant he couldn't speak about what had happened. He said he had wanted to say her wife's name in public. He had not been permitted. She went back to the cottage that weekend, and the weekend after. Kieran finished the cherry wood cabinet and began a smaller piece, a writing desk in birch he was building without a commission. He said he was building it to see what shape it wanted to take. Blythe decided the desk was for her, and began treating it as settled, bringing her schoolwork out to the workshop in the afternoons to draw at the corner of the bench while her father worked. On a Saturday afternoon in November, with the last of the leaves down and the headland bare and clean against the sky, Kieran drove her to the Dartmouth cemetery where Thea was buried. It was a plain stone, her name and the dates, and below it the word surveyor, Thea's own profession, the word her family had chosen. Kieran set a handful of late-season juniper branches at the base. The berries were still blue. Adeline stayed 3 steps back. She understood her place in that moment clearly. She had not known this woman. She had benefited, indirectly, from the decision that had killed her. There was no absolution in standing at the grave. There was only the acknowledgement that the stone was there because a woman had told the truth, had written it down, and had not been listened to in time. Kieran spoke quietly. He said he was sorry it had taken so long. He said the right person had come. On the drive back, they took the long way along the water. The truck didn't have working heat on the passenger's side, and Adeline sat with her hands in her coat pockets. At a red light in Dartmouth, Kieran reached across and turned the vent toward her without being asked, adjusting it with one hand until it pointed at her side of the cab. It was a small thing. It was not small. She began keeping a change of clothes at the cottage in late November. She told herself it was practical. The drives were long. It made sense to stay over on weekends. Kieran did not comment on the appearance of the small bag in the back room. Blythe noticed immediately and told her father at dinner that this meant Adeline would be there for pancakes in the morning, and Kieran said they would need more maple syrup then, and that was how it was decided. She transferred operational management of Forsyth Holdings to an independent executive team in December. She retained one position, chair of the newly established Thea Voss Safety Foundation, an independently audited fund for maritime workplace safety advocacy and support for injured workers in Atlantic Canada. She had not told Kieran the name of the foundation yet. He found out when the provincial announcement ran in the Chronicle Herald in January. Blythe brought the paper in from the front step and set it on the table, and Kieran read the article standing up with his coat still on. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he sat down. Adeline poured him coffee and sat across from him and waited. He said, "She would have found that embarrassing." "I know," Adeline said. "I named it anyway." He looked at her. Something in his face settled the way wood settles when it has finally been fit into the joint it was made for. By March, she had moved her primary address to Dunmore Point. She ran the foundation from a small office above the Mahone Bay workshop of a local boat builder who had rented her a corner of his space for what she suspected was a gesture of goodwill toward Kieran rather than a business decision. Blythe came by after school on Tuesdays and did her homework at Adeline's desk with her shoes off and her socked feet tucked under her, and on those afternoons the foundation's correspondence tended to go unanswered, while they argued about whether ravens could remember specific humans and whether the one Blythe called Muriel was the same bird that had appeared the previous winter or a different one. Kieran finished the birch writing desk in April. It was a simple piece, clean lines, 2 shallow drawers, a surface sanded to a smoothness that made you want to put your hands flat on it. He carried it into the cottage and set it under the window that looked toward the lighthouse. Adeline ran her hand along the top. "What do I owe you for it?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "It wanted to be there." In that window, she looked at him. She had learned by then that when Kieran said a thing wanted to be somewhere or to take a certain shape, he meant something more specific than the word suggested. He meant he had paid attention, that he had waited until the material showed him what it was. "I've been thinking about staying," she said. Not as a disclosure. As a fact she was still examining. "You've been here every weekend since November," he said. "That's not the same as deciding." "No," he said, "it isn't." They were standing 3 feet apart in the front room of the cottage with the sea light coming through the window and the smell of birch and linseed oil around them. "I'm not good at not being in charge of things," she said. "I know, and I have no instinct with children." He looked at her with something that was almost amusement. "Blythe has more instinct with you than you have with her, and she's 8. She's not worried about it." Adeline thought about Blythe bringing her the paper in the morning. Blythe explaining the ravens. Blythe falling asleep with her head against Adeline's arm on the sofa last Sunday without any fuss, as if this had always been the arrangement. "No," she said, "she's not." Kieran reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her face with the back of his hand. It was not a tentative gesture. It was the gesture of someone who had been thinking about making it for a long time, and had finally decided the time was right. She did not move away. Outside, Blythe's voice came from the direction of the woodpile, narrating something to herself, probably to Muriel, probably something that would eventually require explanation. They stood there in the room that smelled of birch and linseed and salt air, and neither of them spoke, because what needed to be said had already been said over the course of months, in cups of coffee and long drives, and an envelope passed across a table, and a foundation named after a woman who had written the truth down when no one wanted to hear it. In May, when the headland turned green again, and the ravens came back to their post above the water, the three of them painted the new addition to the workshop. Kieran on the upper boards, Adeline at the middle height, Blythe crouched at the baseboard with a brush too wide for her hand. The foundation announcement had run in every Atlantic front paper. The RCMP case had concluded. The silence agreements had been dissolved, and every name on the original safety report had been published, with context in a public register maintained by the province. Blythe looked up from the baseboard. "Adeline," she said, "are you going to live here?" Adeline looked up at Kieran on the ladder. He was looking down at her with an expression she had come to know, not waiting for the answer, already knowing it, just watching her arrive at it herself. "I'm already here," she said. Blythe accepted this as the complete sentence it was, dipped her brush, and went back to work. The lighthouse stood at the end of the headland in the May light, its lamp unlit for 30 years and likely forever, but the tower itself clean and straight and in better repair than it had been in decades. Because the man who had been keeping it had understood that some things are worth tending even when their original purpose is gone, and that the light, if it ever needed to be, could be restored.